we always start with a survey. And it's interesting, actually, there's some of the reactions. I remember at the book launch, we we had someone from a company that does employee engagement surveys, and they'd read the book, and their sort of reaction was that we as authors were against surveys in some kind of way. And of course, it's interesting because we're not, but we do critique surveys within the book. We point out shortcomings and advantages, but that's what we would do with all of the methods. So, to be absolutely clear, we do firmly believe that employee surveys are fundamental, and we would probably always start with some kind of survey, absolutely. But, just to rely on a survey only, which we did find, talking to many people, there are a large number of organizations that do only rely on one annual survey to tick the listening box. And when of course, that is really quite problematic. But to answer the question, I think we identified 16 different what we call methods of listening to employees in the book. So there are many, but to sort of just talk about the obvious ones, they are well, they're called focus groups. I don't really like the term focus groups for listening to employees, but that's the language we tend to use that's understood. But essentially, is what I was talking about earlier: getting small groups of employees together with no real agenda set for the discussion, having leaders attend those, and just listen to what employees are thinking and feeling. So I personally am a strong advocate for having no agenda for those. And that's what I did when I was at BT. And I think it really surfaces some interesting stuff. But equally, you could go in and run a series of, call them focus groups, call them listening sessions on that basis with a specific topic, and that also is beneficial, of course. But there are a couple of things about that. I mean, for me, when I did this, I made sure that none of the employees who were invited were from the same team. So, and of course, make sure that none of the employees in these sessions are present, with a manager, their manager. So no managers of people present to be involved. And the reason for that is because if you attend a session like this with another employee in the same team, you may be conscious or worried about saying something that person who you work with may think is a bit silly or a bit strange. And the same goes for, you would be reticent to say something in that setting if your manager was there, because you might not be sure about how your manager may or may not take what you're saying. So that for me is the way I ran them. The senior leader that I brought in would just introduce themselves briefly for 5 minutes, and then under my direct gaze would not interact at all until everyone in the room had been able to go around and talk about things that they wanted to express. And then what I would do at that point was I would just collate. I would say, well, 3 or 4 of you have mentioned this topic. Let's talk about this. And then the senior leader's role is to sort of discuss that topic. But again, it requires quite strong coaching to the senior leader not to be defensive, not to go and answer it and say, oh, yeah, it's a good idea, but, we could do that, but we tried it before, it didn't work. That kind of defensive reaction has to be coached out. So the idea would be to say that, the leader would say, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about that? So you really delve into the topic without seeming as though you're cutting the conversation down, because employees are very, understandably very reticent often, even in these sort of safe scenarios, about saying something that they think might be taken the wrong way. And of course, the first time that the leader present responds, if they sort of appear dismissive, it completely kills the whole process, because after then, no one's really going to say anything. So it takes quite a lot of coaching to do that. But I love that method. So that I would certainly do alongside a survey and pulse surveys as well. So
I think the dismissive part, but also being too quick to even if you have the answer, sort of, or if you think you have the answer, sort of someone brings up a challenge and you're like, oh no, that's fine because we've got da 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 da, and actually, even though that sort of productive and it's got a positive intent, it can still have the same effect of kind of, oh, never mind, it's already in hand, so I don't need to worry about it, sort of thing.
Completely. I mean, I did run a session once where one employee was really quite angry about something, and dominated the discussion for a good sort of 10 minutes or so, and was really getting quite worked up about it, understandably. I hate the idea that there are difficult employees in these scenarios. In my experience, I've never come across a difficult employee. I've just come across employees who feel very passionately about something or very disappointed about something. So allowing that discussion, but by the same token, I had to make sure that that single issue wasn't going to dominate the whole session. So it's takes quite careful facilitation, and I was quite lucky because the leader in that group was a really, really good leader, and he said to this person, look, I can really see that you're really quite angry about this. Why don't you come and have a chat with me next week in my office one-on-one? And that really, I mean, it said to that person, I care about what you're saying, but B, it said to the rest of the group that the leader was genuine
Yeah.
and would really take up the point. So a lot of time when I started doing this, I had a few leaders who were very reticent. I was lucky because the chief executive mandated the board to go out and do it. They all had to. But of course, that has its problems because some of them were doing it very reluctantly. And so in the end, I had a couple of quite not so good experiences with one or two leaders who clearly didn't want to be doing this. And one I remember, when I was sort of saying just do a 5-minute introduction, this person did about a 20-minute introduction and ate into the time. So the game plan was to cut down any conversation. And that didn't go well. So after that, to be quite frank with everyone here, I ended up really just focusing on the senior leaders who were open to this process and were willing to work with me on it. It was a waste of everyone's time, trying to get someone to do it who didn't want to do it. And to be frank with you all here, I think this is the reality of listening. I wanted to mention a couple of other methods which people really don't always completely understand. So one of the key findings from our research is, and this surprised me, but employees are actually more comfortable expressing things on digital forums than in any other setting that you provide for them. Now, this was counterintuitive to me because you kind of hear the reticence of people putting stuff on digital forums internally. Okay, they may be quite open about putting stuff on external social media forums, but internally, again, the same thing applies. You're worried about writing something that everyone can see, but they are actually more comfortable. But it's the method that's least used to listen to employees. Now, I don't mean monitor employees. I mean learn from the things that they are saying openly on digital forums. And that's the least used method for listening to employees, yet it appears to be the one that employees find the easiest and more comfortable to use.